All right, this is an Apes Unit 9 review. So first of all, we're going to talk about ozone. So ozone in the troposphere, this is formed by nitrogen oxides. And this is bad for our lungs, right? It hurts our respiratory system. It can worsen asthma. So ozone in the troposphere is bad. However, ozone in the stratosphere, which is the layer above the troposphere, remember that, the troposphere is basically where all the weather happens. And the stratosphere is the layer where the ozone, you have this ozone layer, and it's good for us because the sun has UV radiation that goes down on Earth. So the fact that you have this ozone that kind of blocks this, right, and prevents all of this dangerous UV radiation from coming down and giving us skin cancer, right? That's good. So this ozone is good. Ozone here is bad. But the problem is that a lot of the stratospheric ozone is being depleted. And this is quite a kind of like 50 years ago. But basically what was happening is we were using something known as CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. All right. It has fluorine in it and it has chlorine in it. And what happens is in the stratosphere, the sun is going to break apart this molecule and it's going to kind of release this CO. It's going to kind of detach this CO atom from this whole thing. And this CO atom, what it's going to do is you can think about it as it kind of steals oxygen. All right, so this is O3 right over here, right? This is ozone. And there's 3 oxygen atoms in it, right? Now, what the CO is going to do is it's going to take one of the oxygen atoms with it. So this becomes ClO, right? This becomes ClO. And you're just going to be left with O2, sorry. Just going to be left with O2, right? One of the oxygen atoms basically just got stolen. And what's going to happen is then what the Cl does is it detaches from this oxygen atom. So it just becomes Cl, and then you just have another O. You just have this oxygen atom, right? It kind of separates from it. This oxygen atom is going to react with another oxygen atom in the stratosphere to form O2. And this cycle repeats again. The Cl, once again, it goes to the ozone atom. It attaches, it kind of steals one of the oxygen atoms, right? Then it pushes away the oxygen atom so that this oxygen can form with another oxygen to form O2. And this process repeats. Notice how in this process, O3 is constantly being depleted and just O2 is being formed. We need oxygen to survive, but the thing is that, we're taking all of this ozone and, we're turning this into, oxygen, right? We're depleting this ozone layer, and that's bad because more of the UV radiation will hit Earth. And this cycle just, gets worse and worse with, CFCs, especially since they last long in the atmosphere, right? So what's going to happen is that there's something known as the Montreal Protocol, and this was made in, I'm pretty sure, 1987, and it basically phased out the use of CFCs. All right, so the things that deplete the ozone layer, let's just switch away from that and let's turn our eyes into HCFCs. HCFCs, they're a greenhouse gas, and they still kind of deplete the ozone layer, but not to the extent of CFCs. And now what we have done is we kind of phased out from CFCs and HCFCs, and we're trying to switch to HFCs. And what these are they're basically they have, so unlike HCFCs and CFCs, they don't deplete the ozone, right? No ozone depletion. But the thing about them is they still are a greenhouse gas. So that's another kind of drawback of using this. But it has been really successful. The Montreal Protocol has been really successful, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we're just going to talk about a little bit about the greenhouse effect. So basically the greenhouse effect is that, sun, right? The sun is shining down on the Earth. The sun is shining down on the Earth. We should probably do this in a different color because the Earth isn't red. Now, all right. Now what's going to happen is some of this heat, some of this infrared radiation will be reflected from Earth's surface. So think about things with a high albedo. Albedo just means how much does an object reflect light. If I'm wearing a white shirt, right, that's going to reflect a lot of light. If I'm wearing a dark shirt, that's going to absorb a lot of light, so it has a low albedo, right? It doesn't reflect a lot of light. Think about why people don't really want to wear black shirts during the summer. It's going to absorb all that light, right? You're going to get hella hot. All right. Now, what's going to happen is you have things known as greenhouse gases, right? So Earth's surface, some of the heat from the sun is absorbed, some of it is reflected. Now, this infrared radiation that got reflected can be absorbed by something known as greenhouse gases. What greenhouse gases do is they just trap heat in Earth's atmosphere, and what they do with that heat is they can re-radiate it back down. they do re-radiate it in all directions, right? But the thing is that they re-radiate it. Some of it is re-radiated back down to Earth's surface, and this is good because think about it, right? It keeps our Earth warm, right? But the problem is, if we have too much of this thing, too much of a good thing is going to eventually turn bad. And it's going to start trapping more and more heat in Earth's atmosphere, right? The more fossil fuels we burn, the more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and then the more, heat it's going to trap. And it's just going to be like this constant cycle, right? It's going to be really bad for us. And, that has led to a lot of problems. So one problem is you probably heard of this before, but the sea level is rising. Okay. So the fact that the Earth is getting hotter, right? That's no debate. The Earth is getting hotter. These greenhouse gases are here. There's still like ongoing debate on, whether it's greenhouse gases that, increased fossil fuel consumption causing the greenhouse gases that causes the Earth to warm, or it's like a natural cause. There's still like a debate going around it. But, what's not kind of a debate is that climate change is happening. The Earth is getting hotter, whether it's natural or it's anthropogenic or, human caused. And it causes sea level rise. What is sea level rise? It's when the sea level rises. And this is due to one of two reasons. So first of all, you just have the melting of basically ice caps. All right. So think about a freaking glacier, right? That ice is going to melt because the Earth's getting hotter. That's going to release more water into the ocean. But another reason why is because of thermal expansion. This is just a process where water molecules, they basically, expand. Or, kind of, if you have some water molecules right over here, right? When the water molecules are really hot, they're going to kind of move away from each other, right? They are going to start moving away from each other, right? It's going to expand. Their kind of surface area is going to expand. Sorry, the volume is going to expand. This is just like a natural thing that happens, right? So as these water molecules get hotter, it's going to cause thermal expansion, and that's also going to lead to sea level rise. Now, why is sea level rise bad? You can think about it like this. So one thing, most obvious thing is flooding. Right? That's bad for humans, right? People might die. But another thing that can cause is, let's say that if you have this lake right over here, all right? And let's say that there are plants at the bottom of the lake. Plants, remember, they require photosynthesis, right? They need photosynthesis, right? Which is when they take the energy from the sun. They take this energy from the sun, right? And they convert it into glucose, which they use for energy. Now, think about what happens when the sea level rises. Let's say if we just add a bunch more water here. Well, the more water we add, the more water that's blocking the plant from getting the sunlight, right? So, this affects, things like, algae maybe, right? Algae, phytoplankton, right? That require photosynthesis to live, right? And they live in the ocean. Another effect of, sea level rise or, just, climate change, right? The thing about, when the glaciers melt, we have the melting of the ice caps. Well, this causes, you got the decreased habitat for things like polar bears, right? Right. So polar bears are going to start losing their habitat. They, a lot of times they use the ice to hunt, their prey. So without the ice, how are they going to get their prey? It's going to be hard for them. A lot of them might die, right? And another effect of sea level rise, there's also something known as saltwater intrusion. So basically, it's basically when like a freshwater source, right, that, us humans, a groundwater source, right, yeah, it can be, used by humans, right, it can be used for like irrigation purposes. Basically, it's when, you have a freshwater groundwater source. So let's say if I'm underground, so let's just say that this is on the ground and we have some water here, all right? This is fresh water and it's in the ground. Now, you don't need to know the science behind this, but it's because of like the density, all right? So because salt water is less dense than fresh water, it's gonna go below the fresh water, and the fresh water is gonna be above the salt water, and it's like a pretty like complicated thing, but kind of all you need to know is that imagine if there's sort of like a barrier between the salt water and the fresh water. All right, this is the barrier. Now, what happens was with sea level rise, well, now you got more water in the ocean, and that puts more pressure. There's more pressure here, and the chances of the salt water actually intruding the fresh water and actually sort of kind of contaminating it with salt increases, right? So, the salt water can intrude with this increased pressure, and us humans, we need this fresh water for drinking. So this can be a huge problem. Now we can talk about the effects of climate change in general. So, yeah, one thing to know is that you have to remember a positive feedback loop. So, for climate change, there's a specific example of a positive feedback loop that you got to know. So, this is basically the melting of the ice, all right? So, let's say if we got some ice here, all right? Let's say this is, the ocean water, all right? The ocean water is beneath the ice. Now, as the climate changes, the ice is going to be melted, right? Ice is going to be melted. Now, because this is ice, right? And ice is, it can be like whitish, like, white color, right? A lot of it will be reflected. But because the climate is, changing and the temperature is increasing, more of the ice will actually melt. Now, because the ice actually melts, this actually exposes the sun to this ocean water. Now, ocean water, it's darker than the ice itself, right? Ocean water is darker than ice. Therefore, it's going to absorb more of that sun's energy, right? It's going to absorb more. Now, you think about like the black shirt during the summer example, right? It's just darker. It has a lower albedo, so it's going to absorb more. And as a result, this ocean right over here is going to increase in temperature. And this heat that's gathered up from the ocean, right? This is going to be, the ocean water. It's going to be transferred to this ice right over here, which causes more of the ice to melt. And this exposes even more of the ocean water, which absorbs even more heat. And this process it's just going to keep on going back, over and over again, right? So this is an example of this positive feedback loop, where just this one thing causes the other thing, which just keeps this cycle going on and on. One thing you also got to know is chloral bleaching. Chloral bleaching from climate change. So basically, y'all probably know what corals are, right? There's these like things that live in the ocean. They're very colorful, and they support a lot of marine life. They are, very important for a lot of ecosystems. Now the thing is that you have algae, so you have algae that sort of attach onto this coral. The algae gives the coral some sugar, and the coral gives the algae a home to live, right? It gives it, I'm pretty sure, carbon dioxide. So, right, this is something known as a mutualistic relationship, right? Mutualism, where like these two animals are, benefiting each other, right? They both benefit each other. Now, the problem is, as the temperature increases, less of the algae, right? There's going to be algae that's going to leave the coral because it's hotter, all right? Can't stand the heat no more, right? So then what's going to happen is that the coral is not going to get the sugar, right? Which is the energy source for the coral. And as a result, it can become bleached, or, have this like white color. The coral is going to have this white color. And it's going to be more susceptible to diseases and stuff like that. All right. Now, another effect of climate change is that disease vectors, think about disease vectors like mosquitoes. Their habitat is spreading. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say if this is the map of the world. Okay. Let's just assume that this is the map of the world. All right. I'm just going to do this. Now, let's say that, the mosquitoes, right? The mosquitoes only live in one certain area. They live in a very hot area. This place right over here. But as the temperature of the earth increases, well, the other areas on the earth start to get hotter as well. And therefore, the habitat for the mosquito, increases, right? Because originally the mosquitoes only lived in this one hot area. But as the earth gets hotter, more and more places start getting hot. So the mosquito can travel to all these areas and spread their nasty germs to everybody, or spread their, nasty diseases to everybody else. So diseases like the West Nile virus, the West Nile virus. You also have malaria, right? This is spreading because of climate change. All right. Another effect of climate change, and obviously, this is just bad for humans in general, right? But another effect of climate change. Let's talk more about the ocean. The ocean, in fact, is getting more acidic, aka the pH of the ocean is decreasing. Why? Because let's say this is the ocean. Ocean has water, H2O. Now, we're burning a lot of fossil fuels, right? And a lot of that is CO2, right? We're releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. Now, some of that CO2 is going to dissolve in the water. All right, so some of the CO2 is going to dissolve in the water, and it's going to react with this H2O. And what it's going to form is something known as carbonic acid. So carbonic acid is H2CO3. And this H2CO3, it's going to turn into an H plus ion and a bicarbonate ion. So this is going to be HCO3 minus. Okay. Remember that when things are more acidic, they have a higher concentration of H plus ions. So the fact that, you have more CO2, more of this reaction happening, and more H plus ions being formed means that the ocean is getting more acidic. And what this can do, what would this do? Well, just think about the range of tolerance for organisms. A lot of organisms can only live in a certain pH range, right? So they have like a range for their pH where, they can live, they can just reproduce, they can grow, right? Think about, let's just say, I don't know. The first thing that kind of comes up to my mind is like, let's just say, human body temperature. Okay. Let's just say human body temperature. Okay. So our human body temperature has like a certain range, right? Now, when we go out of that normal range, well, that's when we have things like fevers, right? Where, we might not think as clearly, we might be kind of suffering, a little bit than we would normally. Now, animals also have a range of tolerance, whether it's pH or, whatever, right? And the thing is that a decrease in the pH can push a lot of marine organisms out of their range of tolerance, and it's going to cause, hindered reproduction, hindered growth, just like a worsened quality of life in general. Speaking of the ocean, well, as the temperature of the ocean increases, well, the dissolved oxygen decreases. This is once again another effect of climate change. All right, so obviously water in the ocean, it holds oxygen, but as the temperature increases, dissolved oxygen decreases. All right, think about an example I kind of think about is like, let's say if you have like a soda on a hot day. All right, so let's say if I have like soda bottle, right? This looks really weird. Let's say if I have a soda bottle. All right. Let's say if I have a soda bottle. All right. This is some soda right over here. This is some soda. And let's say that it's filled with carbon dioxide. All right. I know I'm talking about dissolved oxygen, but just bear with me. All right. We have some oxygen here, carbon dioxide here. Now, if the temperature increases, what's going to happen? Well, the carbon dioxide molecules are going to start to move faster. And there's going to be a greater chance for this, for these molecules to actually escape this container, right? If you open up a soda on a hot day, a lot of this carbon dioxide is going to escape because, well, it's just moving faster. So it just has a higher chance of escaping from the soda. And that's what causes soda during the summer, to become flat, right? It's not fizzy no more. And it's kind of like the same thing here, right? The higher the temperature, well, this oxygen, all of that's just going to escape, and it's going to cause a decrease in the dissolved oxygen. And once again, we come back to this range of tolerance, right? Some, organisms have a certain dissolved oxygen concentration that they like. If it's not to their favor, well, a lot of them might die, right? But for apes at first, I'm pretty sure you don't want to say that, they die. You want to be, just say like hindered, kind of reproduction or like hindered growth, right? So something like that. All right, now we're going to the topic of invasive species. Now, invasive species, well, if you live in NYC, well, you probably have spotted one of these before. These are something known as spotted lanternflies. And I don't know, it's like, I forgot when I kind of saw these things, but I remember that like in like a couple of years ago there were like a lot of these spotted lanternflies. Like I had like no idea what it was called. I didn't know it was called that, but like I kind of knew that they were an invasive species because it was like all of a sudden I just saw all of, these spotted lanternflies everywhere. So every chance I get, I just like crush these little bugs. But anyways, invasive species, they're basically an exotic species. Exotic species that's basically harmful to the environment. All right, that's harmful to the environment, or harmful to the not environment, but harmful to the ecosystem. All right. Now, an exotic species is just like a species that's not like naturally there, right? A native species, it lives there, naturally. But an exotic species, it's like if humans go on a boat and they bring like a certain bug to like another like continent, right? That would be an example of an exotic species. That's the species is not from here, right? But exotic species turn into invasive species when it becomes harmful to the ecosystem. And particularly, one of the things that makes invasive species harmful is the fact that they can outcompete other species for resources. So they outcompete other species for resources, right? Usually, invasive species are R selected. They are R selected. They are R selected, and they are generalists. R selected just means that this species provides little parental care to their children, and what they do is they basically reproduce and have hella kids. All right, it's like let's say for example a spider, right? R selected species usually pretty small, and what spiders do is they reach sexual maturity, they reproduce, and they provide little care for their children because they have so much children in the first place. All right, you're just hoping that some of their children will survive and pass on their genetics and live. Now, the reason why R selected species makes a good invasive species is because, well, there's so many of them, right? But combine this with the fact that a lot of species are generalists, which means they can tolerate a lot of conditions. So they can tolerate a wide range of basically temperature conditions, let's say pH conditions, right? They have a wide range of tolerance. They have a wide range of tolerance. So you're telling me that an invasive species, a lot of them are selected and generalists. So that means that they reproduce a lot, and that a lot of the children will survive because they have a wide range of tolerance and therefore can outcompete other species. Yeah, that's pretty deadly, right? And I mean, in like a year or so or something, I stopped seeing these spotted lanternflies. So that probably meant that they were dealt with. Whether it's like physical control, so whether it's like physical control where people just stomp on the bug to like get rid of it, right? If you have invasive species, well, you could just like naturally get rid of it, right? If it's a bug, just stomp on it. But you can also have laws to prevent invasive species from coming into the place, in the first place, right? A lot of invasive species come because people, transport them in like a ship, for example. So just have a law that prevents the transport of these invasive species, right? And well, they can't come there anymore, right? Or another way to reduce invasive species, just introduce a natural predator. If I could get something that eats this spotted lanternfly, well, this population is going to decrease, right? And we're going to be all good. Speaking of invasive species, we got endangered species. A species that sometimes, a species can sometimes be endangered by invasive species. All right, so endangered species is like a species that's like, it's almost extinct, right? And I mean, one example, it's not endangered anymore, but one example is the panda. It used to be endangered, right? And the thing about pandas is that they're case selected, and they're specialists. They're literally, right? So notice how this is basically like the exact opposite of an kind of invasive species, right? Usually endangered species, they have case selected traits and they're specialists. So they often get outcompeted because case selected species, they have little offspring. Think about humans, right? We only have like one, sometimes two children, right? Every time we, have a baby. And they're also specialists, meaning that, well, they have a narrow range of tolerance. So you're telling me that, this panda right over here, if it gets outcompeted for resources, well, it's going to have little children, right? It's not going to, the population of it isn't going to, recover that fast. And you're telling me that it has a narrow range of conditions, meaning that if it migrates to another area, it's probably not going to adapt to those conditions, right? So, one cause for species being endangered is, well, said it before, I'll say it now, is invasive species. But another, equally, important thing to know is poaching. You're basically just hunting species, whether it's for like fun or, whether it's for like food, right? So, that's, think about the freaking, I'm pretty sure like the rhino, for example. So think about the rhino, right? The rhino, I'm pretty sure like a lot of people hunted it for the horn. So, yeah, that's another thing. And climate change, climate change. I mean, I guess you could say, climate change, but once again, it just comes back to the idea that a lot of endangered species are specialists. So if the climate's changing, well, a lot of them just can't adapt to the new conditions. And that makes them, prone to extinction. Now, there's like a list, like where it's like, there's like a list where it's like, basically lists out like the rankings for whether or not in species is endangered or not. So you have basically least concern, threatened, endangered, and obviously you have extinct at the end. But this is basically like the list, right? You have the species that's of the least concern, meaning that we don't really got a concern about the population of it. Then it becomes threatened, and then if you hunt it even more, then it becomes endangered. And this is where, when a species becomes endangered, this is where things like the Endangered Species Act, this is when things like the Endangered Species Act, the Species Act, this is a law you got to know for the Apes exam. It's in the U.S. It allows, people to classify a species as endangered, and it allows, places like, sorry, I had a little bit of brain fart there, but the Endangered Species Act basically like protects these endangered species from extinction, and it allows people to kind of rent land, or, actually not, or, buy land, sorry. So kind of think about, some, places where, if you have an endangered species, what you'll do is, you can buy land and you basically kind of put the endangered species there and, make sure that, nobody kind of poaches them, right? Make sure that they're safe, and then, they can reproduce, and then the population will, slowly increase. And the Endangered Species Act is basically the extension of CITES, which is also known as the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. And this is basically, imagine the Endangered Species Act for the whole world, right? It basically regulates trade of endangered species. All right, you cannot trade these endangered species, right? And yeah, it's pretty much it, right? These are like the two laws associated with endangered species. They regulate trade on this, and it's also, they also like classify the, if a species is endangered or not.